Hello and welcome to the basic structure of essay writing. And what we're going to do in this set of slides is we're going to look at just the basics of writing your essay. So from the basics that you're probably already familiar with, we're going to just expand on them a little bit to go on to the sorts of things that you need to know when you're writing your essay. So to start with, let's just start with the real basic one you know of, the central structure, the hamburger. So when you think of essays, you usually think of this little beauty, this heart stopper. The introduction, body, and conclusion. Your top half is your introduction, your bun. Your body is your big slabs of meat and cheese. And then your conclusion is your bottom half of your bun. I do apologize to any vegetarians out there to start with. But that's basically your structure for it. Now, the bits and pieces that make up this section in the middle, the body part, and even the introduction as well, are often quite, I wouldn't say poorly done, but they are often not developed quite as well as they could be. And this is something that many of us, even those who have done essay writing for a long time, are not 100% sure about. And particularly when they're thinking about setting out their essay, they have to work out exactly if it is the correct structure, but also if it's making an effective argument. And that's mainly what you'll be trying to do when you're writing an essay. So yes, it's just like essays. You think of your hamburger, it's just like an essay. So what goes into it? We've got another meat metaphor to start with. You need to have an introduction, body, conclusion. But that's not enough. You need to also construct a reasoned argument. And what I mean by reasoned argument is it's not something that's reasonable. It's something where you have an argument with reasons behind it. So basically what you're writing is you're writing something which is communicating your ideas, it's making an argument, it's being strong about what it is you're trying to prove, whatever the question's asking basically, and you are essentially putting everything that you know together. Now the format works towards building that argument. So your introduction, body and conclusion is essentially a streamlined process in which you're constructing your argument. And the other thing you also should be thinking about doing is cutting out the fat, cutting out the things which don't add to your argument whatsoever. So when you have a look at it, when you read it back to yourself, one of the things that you should find is that everything works towards the same goal, which is to answer the question, that nothing's there that shouldn't be there, nothing's there that doesn't answer the question or goes on a bit of a tangent. It's all where it should be. So your introduction, first of all, needs to be short, not long. Now, you might find this as a controversial point because some teachers will tell you write a big long introduction. Introduce everything. The reason why I would recommend you don't do that is simply because your introduction is really just there as a bookend. It's something that appears at the beginning just to very quickly introduce your argument. It's basically something that's either 4 or 5 sentences, and it should focus on 2 things: answering the question or rephrasing it in your own words, so changing the words of the question to suit what it is you're writing about, and giving it a very brief definition, which then your main points will attempt to answer. So by having those 2 things together, now yes, you could say you could do that in as little as 2 sentences, but if you expand it to about 4, perhaps 5 sentences, then what you're doing is you're not only answering the question in your own words, but you're giving a definition and then you're just elaborating very quickly and starting your main points. So that's basically the thing you should be looking at doing to start with. You also don't get prizes for being clever when you do this sort of thing. So don't try and write a sales pitch. Don't necessarily go off and find a miraculous quote or talk about the meaning of life in your introduction, because it's not necessary. You'll be doing that in your discussion in your body anyway. So there's no point trying to wow the marker with this beautifully worded, spectacular orchestra rendition opening, when really all you need to be doing is just outlining your point of view. That's really all it's there for. Now, your body, which is, I guess, the most important bit, is its 3 to 4 main points, no more than 4. You should be really looking roughly about 2 to 3 actually. And what they are is basically, it should be formatted in such a way where each argument you have leads into the next one. So you've got 3 points, they essentially flow together. They're like 3 things which are basically joined at the hip but not quite the same. And what that means is you've got an argument that flows from one point to the next and it doesn't seem like you're just making this big massive jump. Now, obviously, it needs to also start with your most dominant point. Don't be one of those people who thinks that it must have a big surprise ending. It's not a narrative. So when you're writing an essay, you need to start with your big guns. You need to start with the best possible reason you can think of. And that takes a bit of planning. You can't think of it halfway through. You need to think about it from the very beginning, because your markers aren't going to wait until halfway through to find your best point. They're going to want it at the beginning. They want to see that you know exactly where it is that you're focusing on. And if you're doing it towards the end, they may have given up hope by then. And even if they get it, it might rescue your marks a little bit, but they're still going to have that sour taste in their mouth. And the other thing is having 6 or 7 points. And this is something that's quite common, which is that a student will write 3 or 4 of their main points, and then they'll realize that they got 500 words of their limit to go, and go, what do I do now? And then they'll think of all these other ideas which they've discarded before and say, oh, let's just chuck it in. They're not going to care by this point anyway. Your markers do care. And when they see these 6 or 7 extra points, which aren't really needed, what happens is they'll go, oh, what are you doing that for? Why couldn't you put more effort into your main arguments? And generally, if you've got even something that's 2,000 words long, if you've got 6 or 7 main points, that means you haven't developed your 3 points enough. Now, even though that might make your main points about 600 words each, it's something you still need to do. You need to practice elaborating on those, discussing them, talking about them a little bit more, and doing so in such a way where you are really developing them. Even someone who is doing a thesis or something along those lines will really focus on a couple of very key ideas and will just expand on them in a huge way and give subcategories and categories which all relate to that one big idea. And they don't necessarily have to come up with a whole heap of other different ideas. They come up with one idea and then they research the living daylights out of it. They find out everything they can about it. And that's what you should be doing as well. Now, why only 4 main points? Well, it's better to strengthen a main argument than start a new one or a weak one. Now, what I mean by that is as I said before, if you've got 6 or 7 other little tiny points, what you're essentially doing is you're wasting space. By strengthening your main point, you're contributing to your argument. You may contribute to it too much, but that being said, it's much better to continue on a little bit too much for a main point than to start with all these little weak appendix points, things that aren't really needed. Now, the more you discuss for each point, as I said, the more valid it becomes. So, when you are expected to write an essay, they're going to expect you to develop your points. They don't want something that's a brief 100-word paragraph which doesn't really tell us anything about it. That just introduces the idea and says that's true because I think it is. No, you need to develop it. You need to discuss it. You need to come up with all the reasons why it's true. You need to leave your marker in absolutely no doubt whatsoever that what you're saying there is true. And by grouping your ideas, as I said, under a main point, you're covering a much wider area. And this is what the pie here is for. Not just because I'm hungry. It's there because of the fact that what you're trying to do is you're trying to cover as much of the pie, if that's your question, as possible. So when you're having a look at your question and answer and you're trying to put it all together, you're not going to cover every aspect of this. You're going to cover the majority of it though. So you need to find some main ideas that are going to cover big chunks of it. And even if you do leave some bits out, that's fine, because you've covered enough of the main point to really be able to have a cohesive argument, one that stands up. You'll have a 60-40 as opposed to those who write very weak points, which only cover a very small section, basically that bit that's cut out, and leave the whole rest of it for the ants to fight over. If you're doing that, then really you're missing a lot of the point of what it is you're supposed to be writing about, and you're not really answering the question. You're answering a very small part of the question. And you're doing it very well, mind you, but you're not answering it in full. Now, this is an idea of grouping some points so you get a bigger chunk and you can discuss it a little bit more cohesively. So if you're to look at what are the reasons for drivers' deaths, and you go driving too fast, and you go street races, and you go pushing themselves too hard when you're wanting to see how fast you can go for the first time, and then people in a rush, you've got all those 4 things together and you're going, okay, how do I group those together? What is the common ground? And then you think, I don't know, can I just write them all as 4 separate points? Well, you could do that, but really driving too fast street racers pushing themselves, people in a rush, can all be grouped under speed. And if you start off with speed, you're covering a much bigger portion, which includes all of these things. And you can use all of these things as your valid reasons why, but you're grouping them under that banner of speed. So immediately you're focusing on the main reason for driver deaths is speed. Simple as that. Makes it much, much easier. And if you start with something like street races, for instance, that's not the main reason for driver deaths. It's a problem. It's a pain in the backside, but it's not the main reason why. Now, the thing is, it becomes much stronger, and it also avoids repeating yourself, basically. So all of these things, when you're discussing them, will be repeating themselves over and over again. If you group them under the term speed, then what you're effectively doing is you're compressing what it is you're writing, and that means you can put more detail into your explanations and your examples as well. And you can unify them all under a single argument, which makes it much stronger. Let's put it this way. You want a big, big argument, not a very small one. So if you can do that straight away from the beginning, you're going to impress your markers with basically how much you can put things together. You can draw all the dots. You can connect every little bit of it together. Now, your conclusion must not, I repeat that, I'll repeat it again one more time, just for the hell of it, must not introduce any new ideas. You are not saving your best till last. That should come first. So you're starting with your main point, not starting with it last and trying to wow the people with this big philosophical conclusion, when you could simply do that from the beginning and explain your philosophical revelation throughout your essay, as long as it's relevant, of course. It is a way, though, that you can reconnect your main points to your question. So it's a very simple and very effective way to basically say, this is how I'm reconnecting my argument back to the question again. So I'm telling you all the facts and just really quickly going back over them, proving that everything I've said answers the question. And all in all, that is the basic structure of an essay. Really, the simplest thing to do is just that. Keep it simple. Don't try and overcomplicate it by introducing all these different things and trying to make it sound too fancy. Essays are boring to write, but they're also very simple to write when you write them in a boring way. If you try to overcomplicate them, then what you'll find yourself doing is you'll confuse yourself, you'll confuse your marker, and when you're doing an important exam, the last thing you want to be doing is confusing everyone. So that's about it, really. Make sure you just keep your structure nice and simple, focus on constructing your argument, and that's about it. So until next time, I'll see you later.